This series of short videos is sponsored by the Kentucky Rifle Foundation to share the knowledge and research of select Kentucky Rifle Association members.
Hi, my name is Frank Kobilis. I am a member of the Kentucky Rifle Association and since 1990, and I've been past president of the Kentucky Rifle Association. I was president 2003 to 2005. I guess I've probably been a collector of some sort or another for most of my life. I started out collecting when I was about 10 years old. My grandfather gave me an old 12-gauge shotgun. Later went into the military. When I got out, I started collecting Civil War items, and I had Civil War rifles and carbines. And probably around 1978 or 79, I was introduced to George Stanford, who is an old-time Kentucky Rifle Association member. I was invited to his home, and I got to go down his basement and look at his gun wall, and his wall was just covered in Golden Age Kentucky rifles, and I was mesmerized by them. And it was at that moment I realized that I didn't want machine-made guns anymore. I wanted Kentucky rifles. So my collecting interest changed. I was intrigued by the beauty of them and the carving, so I went ahead and started selling off my Civil War items, and I started collecting Kentucky rifles as best I could at that time. So I've been collecting for probably almost 50 years now, and it's my passion. I love it, and I really enjoy being a member of the Kentucky Rifle Association.
What regions, schools, eras, or makers have you focused on in your collecting and research?
Well, I like Pennsylvania-made rifles, and I like Maryland-made rifles. And I have been very interested in John Armstrong from the Maryland school, but in Pennsylvania, I really like the Lebanon County school, as in particular, Nicholas Beyer. And I'm not exactly sure how I did it, but over the last 50 years, I've owned 14 Nicholas Beyers. And I've had an opportunity to study them and look at his work and see all the nuances in his work. And I've enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot about Nicholas Beyers, and that's what I want to show you today. There's not much written on him. He's kind of a mystery in the gunsmithing world. He was a very prolific gunsmith. He made a lot of Kentucky rifles from the Golden Age, beautiful carved rifles. There's just not much out there on his life. So recently I contacted the Lebanon County Historical Society, and I was able to get an archivist to start researching Beyer and his life to see if they could turn up anything new. The only thing new that I actually could turn up was that I found out that he was born earlier than we thought he was. And he was born on July the 10th, 1777, and he was baptized in July 31st of that same year. His parents were Hans Michael Beyer and Anna Marie Beyer, and it's believed that his father arrived in America from Germany in 1750 and then took the oath of allegiance to England and settled in what's now Lebanon County area. After that, Beyer didn't show up in the records again until about 1807, when he was shown to be working as a gunsmith near Annville, Pennsylvania in Lebanon County. At that time, it was actually Lancaster County. Later, it transitioned to Dauphin County, and then finally in 1813, it was Lebanon County was created, and that's the county he worked in. He spent his whole life working in the Annville, Pennsylvania area. That's where he lived, that's where he built rifles, and that's where he died.
What are some of the most common characteristics of the Beyer's guns?
Well, I look at Nicholas Beyer's work in three phases. Nicholas Beyer, it's believed, was apprenticed to the famous gunsmith John Philip Beck, J.P. Beck. And his early works were very much like Beck's work. Steve Hench, who's a noted collector and historian in the KRA, told me one time that he had owned a number of signed J.P. Beck rifles that to him looked like they were made by Nicholas Beyer. And he called them Beck Beyers. And we discussed that, and apparently in his belief is that toward the end of Nicholas Beyer's apprenticeship, J.P. Beck allowed him to stock the guns, make the guns, and the only thing that J.P. Beck did was just put his signature on them. So a lot of the guns that Beyer made were very, very similar to Beck's work. When Beyer first finished his apprenticeship, his rifles, if you held them up, next to a J.P. Beck, looked very much like Beck. He used a whale-tailed patch box, which was an early style patch box. He had similar characteristics. A number of his guns have the famous inscription under the barrel, INRI, which stands for Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The only other gunsmiths that I'm aware that do that are J.P. Beck and Christian Beck, one of the Christian Becks that worked closely with J.P. Beck. It's believed that inscription was a religious symbol, and it's also believed that it was blessed by a minister. It's also believed by Steve Hinch that when J.P. Beck died, that Nicholas Beyer was able to purchase his parts and his tools and use them in his trade. So some of the early characteristics of Nicholas Beyer are, one thing that I've noted is the side plate on the rifle. And on his early rifles, right after he left J.P. Beck, the side plates were almost identical to J.P. Beck's. They were smooth, no little extensions on them. And later, a short period later after, maybe I'd say 10, 15 years after he left Beck's shop, he started putting little ears or horns on his side plates. As time progressed, he entered another period, a middle period, and then finally a third phase that I call his folky period, where he was basically a folk artist. He did Pennsylvania Dutch birds on his cheek pieces. His side plates, these little escutcheons or pieces on the side plates, became much more pronounced. I have one here that has that feature. They became larger and more swelled. They just became more of a folk art piece than his earlier pieces. Another thing that he did when he first left J.P. Beck's shop, his beaver tails didn't have any carving in them. Shortly thereafter, he started adding little incised carving marks in his beaver tails. Almost every gun that he made had that little mark inside of his beaver tails. The other things he did was his patch boxes. His patch boxes were beautiful. The most common one is the one I'm holding in my hand, which is what I refer to as the preening bird. He also used what I say is a sitting bird, which is on this rifle here. It's a bird leaning or laying on top of the patch box. He liked birds in his work. He had them on his cheek piece, he had them on his patch boxes. He also had one where it looked, that's been referred to as a man pounding on a tom-tom on the top portion of the patch box. He had several different styles, but like I said, the most common is this preening bird. If you see this preening bird, it's going to be a Nicholas Beyer rifle. His carving is deep, it's bold. He, most of the time, signed his barrels with N. Beyer, and that was a very common feature of his, but I have seen some Nicholas Beyers that weren't signed. I've seen Nicholas Beyers with no patch boxes. I've seen Nicholas Beyers with patch boxes and no carving. So when one buys Nicholas Beyer, you should be careful to look at the carving and make sure that it's Nicholas Beyer's carving and not something that was added later on as a decoration. Several years ago, a collector friend of mine obtained a Nicholas Beyer that was very crude and very primitive. When I first saw it, I thought it was a crude copy of a Nicholas Beyer. It was signed in Beyer, but the engraving was very scratchy, very jumpy, and the patch box was the man on the tom-tom pounding the tom-tom, but the gun was very primitive and very crude. I probably should have bought that gun because later, after it was gone, I realized that it was probably a rifle that Nicholas Beyer made late in his life, shortly before he died, because he had no other occupation, so he had to do that to make money, and I think it was a gun that he probably made shortly before he died. He shows up in 1850 and is listed as a gunsmith, but under the name of Nicholas Beyer, B-O-Y-E-R, which we believe was this Nicholas Beyer, and he is listed as a gunsmith. So we believe it's the same man, and he died in an almshouse in Annville Township in Pennsylvania and is buried in a pauper's grave. Other than that, there's not much else written about his life. That was pretty much all we know about Nicholas Beyer. He's been photographed, his work's been photographed. He was, like I said, he was very prolific. His work's been photographed in several books, Joe Kindick's book on the Golden Age of Kentucky Rifles, on Jim Johnson's book, and also the Kentucky Rifle Foundation has done several flash drives that include Nicholas Beyer's work. And I recommend that you go to the Kentucky Rifle Foundation website and look for these pieces, and you can see the pictures and then blow them up and see the details that I had described in this discussion.
Can you walk us through the three rifles you have on the table and describe the periods of Beyer's work that they represent, or maybe the time frame they come from? Yes.
Okay, this rifle, I believe, is in shortly after he left J.P. Beck's shop. It has the preening bird patch box. It's profusely relief carved on the cheek piece, has beaver tails with the small little incised carving lines I told you about. It has what they call the raised thumb piece in the carving, which is another feature he did frequently. Nicholas Beyer signed the barrel. Oh, one other feature that he did, which is notable, is that he always, for whatever reason, used 3 rivets to hold his nose caps on. He had one on each side and one in the middle. That's a very distinctive signature of Nicholas Beyer. The other rifle I have here is an earlier rifle, not long after he left J.P. Beck's shop. This one has very slight little pecks in the side plate, which indicate to me that this is an early gun. Again, it's relief carved, and it has the preening bird. The other rifle I have here is one of his later rifles, and this is what I consider more of the folk art period. And as you can see on the side plate, it had these ears on the side plate are now more pronounced. They stick out more. They fold over more. They're very obvious. The carving is no longer relief carved, although it is some relief carved with the raised escutcheon around the thumb piece. It's insides carved. And also, this has a later, what I consider to be a later feature of the resting bird on top of the patch box lid. I think Nicholas Beyer was an important gunsmith during the Golden Age. He's very prolific. You see a lot of his guns. They're still very desirable, very collectible, and very much sought after. Like I said, I recommend that you do more research. You can read the Joe Kindig book. He has a nice section in there about Nicholas Beyer, and also go to the Kentucky Rifle Foundation to look at their flash drives for more information.
For more resources on collecting, research, high-quality photographs, and more, visit the KentuckyRifleFoundation.org. And to get a taste of what the Kentucky Rifle Foundation offers, visit their Facebook page under Kentucky Rifle Foundation for weekly posts and updates of fantastic original long rifles. I'd like to extend a special thank you to the Kentucky Rifle Foundation for sponsoring this short series of videos, as well as Frank for sharing his knowledge and passion to help educate future generations.
I was watching all this.